Ordinarily now we'd introduce our main presenter for the evening, but we have a special interlude. We have a special guest here in the crowd with us. A gentleman who arrived in Vail also in 1971, same year that the Vail Symposium was born. You'll know him as a pioneer of this world-class medical system we have here in the Vail Valley and one of Vail's first doctors. Would you please welcome the 2024 trailblazer in Vail, Dr. Jack Eck.
Well, this is wonderful tonight, and I feel very honored to come here. Okay, is that better? I feel very honored tonight being here amongst this group of folks. Most of there we go. Hey, now I'm cooking with gas, yeah. But it's a real privilege coming here, seeing what we've got going here in the center of our world. And the world changes, and we have to change with it, but that's sort of the fun of it all, and keeping things going. But from the remarks I wanted to put together, it's just interesting. It's really wonderful to see everyone here tonight. We're so lucky, we really are so lucky, to live in a community of people who care about one another. Boy, you can't beat that. So thanks for being here, and thanks for the Vail Symposium and the other organizations putting this program on. Now, you know, it's difficult feeling alone in this world. After my experiences in Vietnam as a 26-year-old flight surgeon with an assault helicopter outfit in the DMZ, I was there too, scared and afraid. And I felt alone. But coming home and being in a community of people who cared really made all the difference. And that carries on forever and ever in our lives and future lives. And it was this community, Vail, that cared and allowed me to survive emotionally and physically. I've also had patients who have suffered from behavioral health issues too, including some who are no longer with us. So these topics actually are very personal to me. I'm so proud of the commitment this community has made to behavioral health. You can already see the investment both in terms of dollars and human resources. And just look down the street at the Uyghur Center and pre-court facility. If you don't understand the depth of what we have here, it's one of the most sophisticated, caring, group of different people with different specialties, different points of awareness that will make a difference in our community. It's just tremendous, so we're just lucky we have it here. Vail Health and so many organizations, and many of you have really stepped up, and it's really changed people's lives. And it's really fundamental to see what difference people do day to day, what keeps them going, what keeps them motivating. But when you look down deep and see where things are coming from and how they got there, it does make sense. And I think we have the opportunity in our lives to really bring something back to it. I hope we all learned something this evening and leave with a greater understanding and commitment to this topic that leaves no one untouched. So thanks for being here tonight. I'm just delighted with the privilege of being here with this group. And from my perspective, as well as yours, we can carry on some interesting discussions if we care to. So I'll let the door open here from my perspective and take it any way you wish to go.
All right, to introduce our presenter this evening, please welcome our program manager, Megan McGee-Bonta.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Dr. Eck. Good evening, and thank you for joining us for Multigenerational Hope, Mobilizing Resilience in Youth, Families, and Communities. We would like to extend a special thank you to our interpreter this evening and our Spanish-speaking attendees. And while most of our interpretation will be via headset, to let you know that if you need a headset, they are in the back. Buenas noches y bienvenida a la esperanza multigeneracional. Movilizar la resiliencia a los jóvenes, las familias y las comunidades. Nos gustaría extender el agradecimiento especial a nuestra intérprete esta noche y a nuestra comunidad hispanohablante, aunque la mayor parte de nuestra interpretación será a través de los auriculares. Para informarles, si los necesitan, están a la parte de atrás. We'd like to acknowledge our community partners this evening, including One Book, One Valley. This partnership includes the Bookworm of Edwards and Vail Public Library, represented here this evening with the Vail Valley Read Calling for a Blanket Dance, a semi-autobiographical story about multi-generational resilience, whose author, Oscar Okea, will join us April 4th. We would also like to thank Mountain Youth for making tonight's interpretation possible. With that, I would like to introduce our speaker this evening, Dr. Judith Landau, as well as community partners and panelists. Dr. Judith Landau, while I won't, I could spend the rest of our evening listing her impressive credentials. She is an adolescent, child, family, and community neuropsychiatrist who has specialized in addiction and family engagement for more than 50 years. She has taught in over 100 countries, has served as a consultant to the United Nations, World Health Organization, National Institute on Drug Abuse, National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, SAMHSA, has served as a professor of psychiatry and family medicine at the University of Rochester and University of Pennsylvania, senior consultant at NYU and Columbia, and has devoted her career to developing evidence-based, best practice collaborative family and community resilience models. She is the past president of the International Family Therapy Association. I could go on. Joining her later in the program are community partners, Marcus Carter, Senior Manager of Partnerships and Engagement at Mountain Family, Julia Kozusko, Executive Director of Early Childhood Partners, Jordan Saldine, School-Based Clinician at Your Hope Center, and Dr. Casey Wolfington, Senior Director of Community Behavioral Health at Vail Health. For now, it is an honor to welcome Dr. Judith Landau.
An auspicious start. Apologies if that rang in anybody's ears. Thank you, James.
My pleasure.
And Megan, thank you for your introduction. And I'm really excited about being here with all of you this evening. So I was delighted with the Paradise Paradox presentation. That how many of you attended that or have seen the movie? Because I think it so summarizes what a lot of us are dealing with on an everyday basis. And it really illustrated it perfectly. So if you haven't seen it, it's available on YouTube. We tend to focus on adolescence because I think for those of us who have children, having adolescence has always been regarded as one of the challenges. But I'm delighted this evening that we have a spectrum across the board, starting with early childhood, because that's really where prevention begins. So what I'm going to cover is how we access resilience in the face of current challenges, look at a snapshot of today's youth, and then look at the impact of transitions across time and how we react to change and how we're dealing with the current challenges that we're all facing. And then I'll do a brief overview of transitional family therapy as an example of an evidence-based model for youth, families, and communities. I'd like to share a case example and then play with all of you, and hopefully you'll agree to play with me, looking at some clinical strategies and tools, and then we'll have brief presentations by our community partners and discussion with everybody. So I'm thrilled that we have a complete representation of services, and hopefully we'll have some very lively discussion. So I thought we'd start by looking at our definition of resilience. And I see it as the capacity, hope, and faith to withstand major trauma and loss, overcome adversity, and to prevail, usually with increased resources, competence, and connectedness. And this valley and the developments in behavioral health are a perfect example of the enormity of resilience in this valley. The individual is the integral unit of the family is the unit of the community. So for me, resilience depends upon the health, and that's physical, emotional, and mental health, and resilience of the individuals and families in the community. As Dr. Eck expressed, we live in our community. Our connections to family and community are what keep us alive through tough times. So adolescents and young adults, seeing we're talking about youth, respond differently from adults to stress. And you can probably come up with all of these points. Believe they're invincible, are less likely to use protective measures of any kind, and this generation of adolescents is different. As our grandparents said of us when we were adolescents, and as we say of our grandchildren. But every generation of adolescents is different. Experience, culture, and environment fashion each generation to suit the times, which means the way in which resilience manifests in our kids is unique in each generation. So how do we view the resilience in this generation of adolescents? They were born after New York's 9/11. They wouldn't recognize these. Some of us are old enough to know what they are. So let's look at what we mean by transitions. We're all vulnerable during times of change, whether it's positive or negative, our celebrations, our tragedies, our disasters, and our joys. So how do adolescents respond to stress? I won't read these for you because you can all see them, right? So all adolescents have become aware of their potential mortality at a much younger age. For those of you who have children who were born before 9/11 versus those after, for those of you who have kids born before or during COVID, have suddenly become aware of the danger of mortality. Whereas for many of us, when we grew up, there wasn't a thought that death could be around the corner or that we might be losing friends. Death was something that happened to the elderly. That's changed for this generation of young people. And the stress that people feel with transitions and change can manifest in physical symptoms. We each have a distinctive response. I don't know if you know that over 90% of visits of what we call frequent flyers to primary care are based on somatic or body demonstration of stress. How do you experience stress in your body? Anybody? Headaches? How many of you get headaches? Stomach ache, butterflies, neck pain, back pain, right? And we know what those are, but for many people, they don't know that there's not a serious physical illness or that this is a manifestation of stress. So learning about it is really critical. So somatic body symptoms can serve adaptive functions in the family and be maintained by family patterns. So how many of you have experienced trauma somewhere in your immediate family or neighborhood or close friends in the last year? Right? If I'd asked this question 10 or 15 years ago, there may have been 1 or 2% of the participants putting their hands up. Now we're looking at 10 to 20%. And what happens with major transitions is we see a 30% increase in the rates of stress that results in post-traumatic stress, heart, lung problems, and other chronic life-threatening illnesses, attachment disorder, depression, and suicide, and onset and/or relapse of substance use disorders, behavioral compulsions, mental health issues. So what we've seen with COVID in the beginning was a 30% increase in all of these in our community. It's now across the world up to 40 to 50% increase. So we're living in times of stress. And suicide is the second leading cause of death for people aged 10 to 24 in 2017. In 2021, 48,000 people died by suicide in the US, 1 every 11 minutes. So, which is one of the reasons that we come together as a community with all our resources, because connection to our loved ones, connection to our community is what helps with prevention. It's the most significant factor. Drug overdose deaths spike among US teens, even as drug use declines. So we're seeing an overall reduction in drug use, but an increase in our teens, and our valley is no different. And I thought we should just take a look at all the things that we're seeing in the valley that represent what's happening across the US and the rest of the world. Gender dysphoria, eating disorders, gambling, gaming, confusion about who we are, love and sex compulsion, and all of the see me, texting and digital addiction. And it's estimated that kids and youth between the ages of 8 and 28 spend about 44.5 hours each week in front of digital screens. And it's not all studying, much as they would like us to believe it is. So why do we care about families at a time like this? As we're living in a perfect storm, all of these factors threaten the fabric of families, and if families are at risk, youth and communities are at risk. An individual's healing journey is influenced by the family, and trauma impacts not just the individual, but always the family as well. Families are our most valuable resource and source of support for the management of any illness, and families provide a more accurate picture of the individual's symptoms, treatment compliance, than the individual alone. In the 80s and 90s, the insurance companies allowed us to diagnose families and not just individuals. And then since the 90s and into this century, unfortunately, we're back diagnosing individuals in isolation, where we really need to be looking at what's happening with the entire family. A lot of our primary sources of belief come from our family. And if we don't include them in the collaborative team, they can become a liability rather than a resource. When I was a young psychiatric resident, there was a horrible intervention called parentectomy. The staff in psychiatric facilities believed that the reason kids relapsed after they'd got better in hospital and gone home was because the families were bad for them. It hadn't occurred to them that one can't get one member of a family healthy and expect the rest of the family to be changing in parallel without working with them as well. And it was almost as though, if one takes a piece out of an engine and changes it and puts it back in and expects it to function flawlessly. Fortunately, I don't believe there are many places around the world that are still advocating parentectomy, but we still, and our valley is one where families are recognized as an important resource, but there's still many places around the world where individual kids and youth and elders are treated without the benefit of working with the family as well. So we also get all of our mythology and beliefs from our families and our friends and community. How many of you grew up with a story of something that you learned once you were older was not really relevant? I grew up with my mother saying that we couldn't go swimming on a Sunday afternoon. We weren't allowed to swim after a meal. So to me, that was, okay, it's dangerous to go swimming after a meal. Many years later, I realized that she was a single parent, and the only day she didn't work was Sunday. So if we were swimming, she couldn't have a rest on Sunday afternoon. She had to watch us. It had nothing to do with safety. So, and there was one family where they cut the end of the roast off every time they did the Christmas roast, and discovered years later by a great aunt who happened to come for the meal that the reason that the tail was cut off that roast was because they didn't have a pan big enough. But they all thought that the roast needed to be cut. So think about the stories we grow up with and how that influences our belief systems. And that's the good stories and the bad ones, right? So families influence our risk, relapse, and outcomes of all physical and emotional and behavioral illness. We don't live in isolation. We live in our communities. Are you all familiar with the ACE study? I'm seeing a lot of nods. So physical or emotional abuse or neglect is a precursor of self-injury and suicide, and trauma gets transmitted. Parents' and grandparents' childhood trauma can also influence how children grow. So I think what's important about the ACE study, it was focused on the child's trauma, but in order to be comprehensive, we absolutely need to look not just at the children themselves, but at the stories that are being transmitted down the generations. And that's where we need to look for resilience, because if we look for vulnerability, we'll find it. And we really live as humans between the poles, and we have choices whether we want to follow the vulnerable pole or follow the resilience pole. Because if there has been trauma, as was found in the ACE study, there is the resilience that allows people to survive that trauma. And I think about kids in school and the teacher who has this very excited little first grader who's so excited about class that he spills his juice all over the books and his lunch, and he's sobbing, and she screams at him, "Johnny, how can you make such a mess? Clean it up so we can go on with the class." Versus the teacher who says, "Oh, you were so excited. Let's get it cleaned up so we can go on with this wonderful work." Which of those kids is going to be responsive? Who's going to be excited enough to learn in class? And yet we look for pathology, we look for trauma, rather than looking for resilience. So transitional family therapy, I'm just going to bore you a little bit with some of the background. A lot of treatment models look at one or other aspect of what's happening with families. So what we did with transitional family therapy is say we really need a comprehensive view. We need to look at the why now question, what has precipitated whatever problem it is we're seeing today, what has happened across the intergenerational story with contextual history, themes, scripts, rituals, strengths, and what is the history of the family and the system and the ecosystem they grew up in. Were they living in a time of an earthquake or a war? Was there a flood? Was there an epidemic or a pandemic at the time? What's the whole context of what we're seeing today? So some of that for me was influenced by where I grew up on the southernmost tip of South Africa, before and during apartheid, in a family and group fighting systemic racism, with a father who built community health and preventive centers across the whole country of persecuted communities. I was the oldest of 34 non-blood siblings who relied on one another's parents in the absence of our own. People were being taken into prisons, escaping to other countries, being under banning orders where they could only have two adults in a house at one time. And my stability and understanding of my own survival through a number of physical illnesses, as well as watching my first murder when I was 5, was based in that sense of community spirit, knowing there was always a community that was there for us, regardless of whether our own parents and families were available. And as a young psychiatrist, several of my colleagues and I insisted that the families of both the victims and accused in apartheid be involved in restorative justice, because it's within the family that insight and resolution lies. Our collaboration with the judges led ultimately to the Truth and Reconciliation hearings. And the model of transitional family therapy was forged in trauma and community support and resilience. And my joy at living in a community now where this is the way the community thinks, these are the services that are available, and they're available for everybody. It's a very different community from the one that Jack joined in 1971. And it's a community to which he and all the people here before me have contributed, that is a community to be really proud of. So one of the prevailing beliefs that also resounds through transitional family therapy, have you all heard about Ubuntu? I know it's been on the news a great deal. So it's defined by a person's relations with other people. I am because you are. Without you, I am not a whole person. So it refers to behaving well to others and acting in ways that benefit the community. So the difference between an individual egocentric approach to the world versus a community connectedness approach. And that's the underpinning philosophy of TFT. So if we take a look at some of the bones and some of the techniques that I want to play with you about, think about your own families in terms of where they've come from intergenerationally, the countries, the belief systems, the religions, in terms of where you are in your current present time, and how the past influences the future. So with that hypothetical transitional pathway taking us through time, we go from despair, trauma, and resilience of the past to relief and resolution in the present, and we can choose to take the resilience poles, not the vulnerability poles. As survivors, because we wouldn't be here if our families had gone under. We're the survivors. Our families are the families that survived. And that brings hope for the future. So we choose the resilience poles. We identify positive goals and intergenerational themes, scripts, and strengths rather than looking for intergenerational vulnerability. What are the strengths and themes that kept our families connected, that led to them being pioneers, led to them surviving, led to them staying connected? Because that's what we build on. We don't build on trauma, we build on resilience. So we believe that all individuals, families, and communities are perpetually in transition. We have constant changes, and we're inherently competent, or we wouldn't be here. And when we have support systems and resources that match the level of stress, we survive better. So our theme is to empower family, community, and support system, reinforce our connections to family and culture of origin, resolve unresolved grief and trauma, and mobilize and reconnect our extended support systems. Do you want to guess how many professionals it takes to replace one member of the family or natural support system? Yeah? 5. Absolutely right. So when we see individuals and families who have 5 people helping them, we know that in order to help them become healthy, we need to look for their natural resources. We need to reconnect them with family, neighbors, and natural resources, or they're stuck in the professional system for help long term. So we need to assess every level of the psychosocial, spiritual, cultural environment and focus on the areas that need attention. So let's take a look at a case example. Young Anna was 15 and kicked out of school. She'd been using alcohol since she was 12, was cutting herself, and was promiscuous. For those of you who don't know what a genogram is, don't be overwhelmed. I'm just using it as an example of how many people key people one would want to be involving in whatever one's doing for Anna. This is the family professional's way of depicting a family tree. So what we learned about Anna, who is she's right there. I can't do it without. So Anna is the red with a double circle, and we can see that there are a number of people in her extended family who've had physical illness, an 11-year-old who died of bone cancer after several amputations. Anna's mom, Maria, lost a baby to crib death at 6 weeks, and her grandmother, Carolyn, lost a little girl to bone cancer. And Maria, Anna's mom, lost her dad when she was 1 year old. So we can see quite a bit of trauma in this family. And it's not an accident that Anna started using alcohol and having problems when she was 12. But these are the people who are going to help Anna get healthy. So rather than looking at this as, oh my goodness, we could look at this and get really depressed, we want to look for the resilience and the strengths. How have they survived? How have they stayed connected? How do we build a future for Anna with her family that makes life worth living for her? So we want to shift the family perspective. And the first thing we do is get Anna out of the middle. What happens when someone has a problem in the family, whether it's an elder with dementia or cancer, or a child with suicidality or cutting, like Anna, the first thing that tends to happen is the person of concern, as we call them, and the whole family equates that person with the problem. How many of you have had a family member with a serious illness? And we stop talking to them as people. It's almost as though we address them as the cancer or the dementia. And that becomes the central focus. So the first thing that we start to do is separate her from the problem so that she becomes a member of, here we go again. So rather than her being equated with the problem, we want to start seeing her as a member of the family working on the problem, not as the problem. So she becomes part of the helping team. And once that happens, we're able to work on the problem, and that leaves the space in the middle for other things to come in. So she's now a member of the family, and everybody in the family is involved looking at what else needs to be helped. It wasn't just this little girl, right? What about the unresolved loss and grief about the 11-year-old? What about all the other things? So once Anna is out there as a member of the family, and they're all dealing with the addiction and cutting as a problem, they then have space to look at what's going on with the rest of the family. And if we don't work with getting everybody in the family healthy concurrently, there's very little hope for Anna in the long term. And once we have looked at what everybody needs to do to get healthy, we have a family where everyone is communicating about everything that needs to be communicated with, and we have a huge resource to help deal with, not just with Anna, but with everybody. So one of the other things that we use is looking at the family developmental cycle, and I know many of you have had various developmental models. The one that I really like is this one, so that we're looking at a child being born, going through middle years of childhood to adolescence, marriage, courtship, childbearing, until we have 3 generations living in synchrony going through time together. Okay? So rather than just looking at the youth's development, we're looking at what's happening with everybody at the same time. Now, this diagram was developed in 1985, and we're also looking at times where we come together for births, weddings, and funerals, right? And we separate out during adolescence, reevaluation, and retirement. When are we most at risk of illness? When we're all together or when we're separating? Separating, yeah. So, for example, if we think about that little 11-year-old on the life spiral, that 11-year-old went from middle years of childhood all the way to death in one fell swoop, right the way through that whole spiral. And if we think about untimely loss or any kind of major transition that throws us out of the synchrony of the life spiral, when people lose a pregnancy, a little kid, an untimely death for an adult, they're already, with this 11-year-old, they already pictured what she would be as an adult, what she would contribute to the family. You know, we develop all of those hopes and dreams during pregnancy or while trying to get pregnant. So think about how that untimely loss throws the whole system off, all those hopes and dreams. So this was done in 1985. 30 years later, I looked at the life spiral, and you'll see that one on the right, and it's very different. Modern medical science has given us an extra loop. And that loop we see, it's 10 years. We've gained 10 years. I hate the term, have you all heard the term failure to launch? I get really mad when I hear it, because to me, we've got an extra, that's why I did this work, was to look at what happens with that extra loop. Why are kids staying home, coming back home, not launching? Well, our brains used to mature by 25, 26 years old. The myelin level that protects the nerves used to be complete by 25, 26. We're now seeing completion at 46, 47. Our brains are changing along with our longevity. And yet we're calling kids a failure to launch, where in fact what we're looking at is an extra loop. We go from middle years of childhood to adolescence, not straight on to marriage, courtship, and childbearing, but late adolescence, young adulthood, and we're seeing childbirth with or without marriage. It's no longer 40s reevaluation. People are choosing new careers in their 50s. And retirement, mandatory university retirement used to be 65, it's now 75. So there are ways in which our culture has adapted to this extra decade, and other ways in which we're blaming the youth for not leaving home, rather than saying we need to be adapting to a major cultural shift. So all individuals and families are in transition, and depending on environmental and cultural influences, may be in or out of synchrony. If we're expecting the kids to behave the way we did, we're going to be sadly disappointed. They're different. They're living in a different time. They've had different life experiences. And when we see the transitions being out of synchrony, family roles become confused, and if we don't work with resolving that, that pattern gets reverberated down the generations. So one of the things that we do with our families that that I find really useful is what we've called a transitional checkerboard. So how many of you as little kids were asked by a parent, can you mind your younger sibs or help mom with the groceries or the cooking or something, right? Almost all of us at some point. It's a normal thing to involve the children. Now, in the old days, people lived with extended family around them, right? How many of you have extended family near you? Maybe 5%. It's very different from what it would have been 2 generations ago, right? So when we had everybody available, if one of the parents was missing, a grandparent might come in to fix the stove or babysit the kids. What happens now that they're no longer there? One of the kids starts to step up. And if the absence is extended, and it could be any of the kids, and it could be either mother or father, and stories and secrets pass through those levels to a certain degree. There's certain secrets that parents keep in the parent level or in the spousal level, but as kids move up into those roles to help, those secrets start to be shared. A lonely mom might confide in a child. A lonely dad might suggest that son travels with him. So we see a change in that transitional checkerboard where the kids start moving up into roles that they're not trained for and not ready for. And if there are several siblings, there'll often be a lot of jealousy about, why are you behaving? You're not my dad. And we see sibling challenges and battles. And let's say the missing parent, mom or dad, starts to return, or there's a step parent coming in, finding a kid up on that level of either a companion to the remaining parent, or even taking care of that remaining parent if there's grief and loss. So they're up on the grandparent level when someone comes in, either the original parent or a step-parent. And we see enormous battles and now we start getting battles between the spouses, because what is this kid doing up on that level? So it's just a useful way of looking at what's happening in a family. So will you please do an exercise with me? I'd like you to add up, if we're looking at the number of transitions and how we get thrown out of sync and how we recalibrate so that we can keep going with our humor, our strength, and our connection to the people we love. Can you add up the number of good, bad, celebratory, sad transitions that have happened to you, your immediate family, your close circle of friends over recent time, let's say 6 to 12 months? Just add them up in your head. Okay? Now what I'd like you to do is choose any one of those transitions and add up the number of tasks that you've had to add to your daily schedule because of that one transition. Things that you didn't have to do until that transition happened. Okay? Done? So 1 to 2, 3 to 4, 5 to 6. How many of you had at least 5 transitions? Okay, that's half the room. How many with more than 5? 10? Wow, okay. How many of you with 5 tasks? 1, 2 tasks? 4? More than 5? How many? Yes. At least 5. More than 5, anyone? Okay, so we're averaging 5 transitions and 5 tasks. So that's 25, 5 times 5 is 25 tasks, right? So if we think about the balance between our resources, how do we get through? The people who can help us, the neighbor who's going to take the kids to school for us, the person who's going to be helping us with meals. Our resources are absolutely critical for coping with the transitions. And the reason that we get thrown out of sync and get stressed by transitions is because the number of tasks that each of those transitions brings, if we don't have the balance of resources, which many of the people in our community don't, we have trouble coping. If we look at a community well, first of all, the average number of transitions that people live in before they get stressed is 3. We can cope with 3 to 4 transitions, most people. And that's pretty much the average of how we live. When it goes over 3, when we're getting to 5, 4, 5, our resources start to be stressed. So if we look at a community when there is not any major transition happening, during no community crisis, the average is around 3, with a little peak at 6, 10, 15. During or shortly after a community crisis, so for example, during a flood, a war zone, COVID, what we were seeing was an average of 6 to 7 transitions. Right? And I'm seeing a lot of nodding. You know, we all went through this, right? So we're looking at 6 to 7 transitions, and then we look at the number of tasks during or after a community crisis. And the task list went up from 2 to 3 to 7 or 8. So you're multiplying 8 by 8, 64. Concrete tasks to get through. And that's why we look at the level of stress. And if we don't look at it across a whole family, but just look at one individual, we're not going to know what the resources are to be able to deal with whatever that individual is struggling with. Okay? So the more transitions, the more resources we need to cope. And when resources are insufficient during time of crisis, we develop emotional, physical, and behavioral problems. And that explains our 30% increase in all the illnesses when we're going through major stress. So we're coming up on time, which is good. So TFT, we developed an adolescent program that compared with treatment as usual at the 3-year mark, families and kids were improving at all of the markers, as opposed to treatment as usual, which went back to about a 10% improvement. The other thing that I'm just going to mention very briefly is that across the world, we're looking at a time where there are not enough behavioral health specialists to be dealing with the enormity of all the transitions that we're facing. So from TFT, we developed peer-based interventions and measured them against professionals trained in the same interventions, and found that we can train members of the natural support system from families and communities to serve their own families and communities as effectively as the professionals. And they get supervised by a professional, which allows us to extend services dramatically. And so they've been used for getting people into treatment and keeping them in treatment and long-term care, for domestic violence, and to mobilize communities and build resilience according to their own community goals. So the time to act is now, and it's inherent in our human condition to move from trauma to resilience. Bringing connection and hope is our only pathway to survival. And if trauma can be passed down through generations, then so can healing. It's all about Ubuntu. Thank you. So let me hand over back to you.
We're going to ask some of our community analysts, providers to come up and to share their resources and their services as well. And then we'll have Q&A for both Dr. Landau and our community providers.
Thanks, Megan. Thank you, Judith. That was amazing. My mind is just like thinking of all the things that you said and connecting to my own experience and
That's great.
experience in our community. So thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Marcus Carter. I'm with Mountain Youth. So I'm here to represent Mountain Youth in this community on the panel, as well as talk about a few of our resources that we have here at Mountain Youth. So one of the things that we do, how many of you have heard of Communities That Care? It's a national coalition. Awesome. It's a national coalition. It's pretty fantastic. They have a great website and a lot of programs that they provide on there as well. It's free or low cost for families. Mountain Youth is also the coalition leader for our county. And so we provide a lot of different programs and events through Communities That Care here at Mountain Youth. You can check out our website, mountain-youth.org, if you're interested in getting connected with Communities That Care. It works primarily with prevention of substance use for youth, more upstream kinds of things, but we have a lot of events that we do around that. So if you're interested in joining Communities That Care, check out mountain-youth.org. We also have our Eat Chat Connect and our Move Chat Connect programs. So these are events gathered around connecting community partners and events around what the community is asking for. So mental health support, family support. How do we handle, my teenagers' addiction to their cell phone, things like that. We bring, try to bring local presenters around that information to connect families together to these resources to help these families thrive. Move Chat Connect is very similar. Pretty soon, in the next couple months, we have one around ice skating. It's one of our most popular ones. So we provide free ice skates for families to join. They get to connect with each other, doing activities, physical activities, and then we usually have a speaker that talks for 10 or 15 minutes around some resources for them also. Aprendiendo Juntos, Learning Together, is our community events and program around our Spanish speakers in our community. So they have a WhatsApp. If you're interested in joining that WhatsApp, you can go online and connect to it. What that does is we provide We have a couple facilitators that are amazing. They answer questions for community members. Say they need help finding a plumber, or they need help with a child who is deaf and they need to learn ASL. We have facilitators who actually connect them with community members, experts, things like that, to help these families thrive. Then we have our We Hear You program. That is an intervention and prevention program that we provide for the community. So what we do is we take referrals, usually from the school. We get a lot of middle school families involved with this. How many of you have middle schoolers? Yes. Is that a tough time? Yeah, right? Our kids are learning how to be autonomous, right? They're becoming little adults, but they think they are adults. And we as adults need to figure out how to bridge that gap, right? Support them without lording it over them or giving them too much independence, right? And so We Hear You focuses on bringing families together. We work with youth as well as the parent or the caregiver, and work on active parenting, right? So we use the evidence-based program Active Parenting of Teens to bring the family together. Very similarly, not just focusing on how can the parent get better and how can the youth get better, but connecting them together, working on that communication with each other. And then Prime for Life is our intervention program that is for teens and young adults who are using substances. And so it's an intervention program. It's used nationally to provide value-based tenets and tenets around motivational interviewing. So we connect teens and young adults to their values, show them high-risk behavior and low-risk behavior around substance use, and invite them, if they find that they're on that high-risk behavior around substance use, we invite them to come up with a plan and accountability around lowering that to a low-risk substance use. And then we have safe driving. That is something that we go into the schools and talk about how to get your license and how to focus on driving safely. All of these things have much better explanations than what I just gave you on our website, mountainyouth.org. All right. Thank you all.
Okay, I don't know how easy that is to reach, so I'll just talk about it. Hi, I'm Julia Kozesko with Early Childhood Partners, a local nonprofit focusing on, of course, early childhood. And I wanted to just start, I felt it important to talk about our origin and how we started in Eagle County. So 20 years ago in Eagle County government was getting calls all the time for children that were struggling in childcare and were being expelled. So many children were being expelled from childcare. As you can imagine, you can think about the impact that that had on the child and the future impact it had on children, going from then childcare to childcare and not being able to stay in a childcare. And then the effect it had on the family, of course, because the family needed to work often, as is the case for many families. And the family also was stressed about what was going on with the child and how they would succeed in later school after early child, the childcare. So we assembled a team of early childhood mental health specialists and educators, early childhood educators, and we created Early Childhood Partners, where we would focus, as we still do, on early childhood mental health, which then we called social emotional skills, because we didn't really think to use the words early childhood mental health. And now we just say early childhood mental health, because we're not trying to hide the fact that that's what it is. It's not just building social emotional skills. We are building social emotional skills, but it is creating the future mental health of a child and the current mental health of the child, and also all the environments that a child is in. Our favorite quote from Harvard is, "Most potential mental health problems will not become mental health problems if we respond to them early." And a lot of people use the word upstream, that we got to keep going upstream, upstream, upstream. And we are as upstream as you get at Early Childhood Partners. We focus on 0 to 6 and believe that is so important. When we think about the mental health of young children, we cannot separate it from the mental health of their caregivers and their parents, just like Judith was saying. They're a unit. There is no separation at the young ages. And we have to consider their caregivers. If a parent's not okay or a caregiver's not okay, a child is not okay. So we focus a lot on helping parents and caregivers, the teachers. We go into childcare, and we're going to talk about a little bit about more of that. If we don't do what we're doing, we're going to see rising rates of toddlers and preschoolers with mental health problems, and they'll just get worse from year to year. Okay, so as you can see, and I think it's really hard to read now that I look at it, I'm going to just talk about us and why we're here, which is a lot of what I just said. But we are focused on assuring high-quality childcare. So we have a whole team, and I'll talk a little bit about that, and nurturing relationships for the adults that interact with our youngest citizens in Eagle County. So we can help their health and mental health for their lives. 61% of children under 3 years old have at least one risk factor for poor health, social, or developmental outcomes. 1 in 6 children aged 2 to 8 have a diagnosed mental health, behavioral, or developmental disorder. A lot of people think they're not going to have mental health disorders diagnosed till they're older, but it's not true. It happens really young, and we see it really young. And Judith's nodding. In the first years of life, when a child is a baby, more than 1 million neural connections are formed every single second. That brain is growing the most it'll ever grow from 0 to 3, about 80%. And then by 5, maybe 95% of the brain has grown, the size of the brain. But of course, I'm even shocked by this 46 years old. I've been telling people in the 20s, and people still think that's old when I say the brain is growing so long, and why are we expecting a 4-year-old to behave like a 25-year-old? So anyway, we are a group of professionals still, early childhood educators and mental health professionals, and we use recognized evidence-based programs, nationally, and focus birth to 6, as I already have said. We do an array of different support services, and we teach parenting classes. We have taught certain parenting classes for the longest in the state, about 19 years, one curriculum. The longest in the state, the biggest classes we have in the state of Colorado, and look, we're a small community, and we have parents that want to learn about parenting in this community. I can tell you, I've met hundreds of them, and they're amazing. We do individual parent coaching sessions, so we do that a lot. The only gift of COVID was that we realized we could do that through Zoom, and we could do it through FaceTime. So if we had a couple and they were in different workplaces, they could meet on Zoom with us and not have to waste the precious 15 minutes each way of a drive that they needed to spend with their young children. So we do a lot of that virtually now, and that has really been helpful. We, through those visits and through our work with young children and their parents, we make referrals for further evaluation, so we can diagnose mental health disorders if we need, or other types of developmental delays and a lot of different issues that are going on with the child. We work in childcare. We do childcare coaching and consultations, so we work in most of the childcare in our Eagle County. We work with teachers who don't have help other than through us. The school district and schools K and up have support, and early childhood does not, unless they have some people like us. So we provide we consult, we provide something called reflective supervision to the teachers to help them. It's therapeutic, it's not therapy, but it helps them be able to fill their cup because it's such a draining. People don't know, but one of the biggest things for early childhood teachers, not a biggest thing, it's an ordinary thing. They have to find coverage to go to the bathroom. It is a big deal. They often have to wait hours to just get their basic needs met. And they're taking care of our most important people in our community. And they aren't paid well enough, so we could go on about that, but they're not scheduled.
I know you like to talk with your hands.
Thank you. Okay, Megan, she knows me. So, anyway, so we provide early childhood mental health consultation. We do, we provide the continuum of prevention, intervention, and treatment. in all the early childhood realm. And again, we provide help to the adults. We build the capacity of the adults that are working with our children, parents and teachers. Okay, let's see if I get this. Okay, and up there, I'm not reading it to you all. It shows our programs. It shows some of the curricula we use. Our mission, if you haven't guessed it yet, is supporting families and early learning environments so every child can thrive, and survive too, but thrive. We want them thriving. And it's every learning environment. So it's parents and of course schools. We have also, and I didn't mention that before on the other slide, but we have a family resource center, and our person that works, that manages our family resource center is here tonight. And we help families with basic needs because we know if a family is so consumed with being able to eat or being able to find childcare, being able to find medical care, counseling, if we don't help with resources and referrals, then how are they going to be able to parent their children? Because they're so focused on the day-to-day needs that they're not getting met. So we provide help with the basic needs, so then we can help them with parenting and then mental health support as needed. And all our services are free of charge because we get a lot of grants and we have a lot of generous donors. So everything is free to all of our families, and everything is offered in English and Spanish because we know our community has a great amount of Spanish speakers. So everything is offered in English and Spanish, every single program we do. And I think I am done. Children's mental health matters. So that's what I'm going to end on. You're great.
Hello. My name is Jordan Seldine. I am a school-based clinician at Avon Elementary, and I work for Your Hope Center. So let's see if this works. It does. So Your Hope Center works directly with the schools, and we have 3 different programs. The first program that is going to be talked about, well, there's the mission. And basically, we want to connect our community to immediate care that can help with stabilization and hope and resiliency. So we have these 3 programs, our school, our crisis, and our crisis stabilization programs that all kind of work in tandem to meet the needs of this community. So first, this is a school-based program, which is what I work for. We are in about 18 schools. We have a partnership with Eagle County School District with 6 bilingual clinicians and at least 1 clinician at each school, supporting students in groups and individuals, and also supporting families and teachers when needed. I think that's about it for that. I can talk more about the school-based program because that's what I work for. The Mobile Crisis Co-Response Program is immediate response. So if you call the Hope Center crisis line, they will come out, they will talk with you. If you are a school-based clinician like I am, we can depend on our crisis team to come to the school if we are having a crisis. And there are always 2 licensed professionals staffed 24/7, 365, which is kind of cool. And then we have our community stabilization program, which is the link between our crisis program to the community. And it's about 1 to 2 weeks where we provide those services, and then we get them connected to outpatient services or whatever that level of care is for them. If they just need the 2 weeks, then they got the 2 weeks. All of our services are free of charge. Nobody pays for anything, which I think is great. And then I can talk a little bit about this school-based stuff. So at Avon, I work directly with students who are kindergarten through 5th grade, and I work with their families, which I know a lot of our clinicians do. And I help them with things like trauma, ADHD, depression, stress, anxiety, anything that they come to me with. I work in tandem with the school counselor and the principal to identify those students who are a little bit higher level need than just meeting with the school counselor, but not so much of a need where they need hospitalization. These are also students that we try to eliminate some of those common barriers to therapy, which would be like transportation, finances, time. I meet with students during their school day, so there is not that extra step at the end of the day for families to have to drive their child to meet with a therapist. I think that's all I have, so I'll move on.
Thank you, everyone. Hi, I'm Dr. Casey Wolfington with Vail Health Behavioral Health. I'm going to try to be brief. I know we're bumping up against time. But I came to this community in 2006, just right after you, Dr. Eck, right? Just right around the corner. But even at that time, in 2006, we had very little behavioral health services in our community. I was one of 5 clinical psychologists in the community. We had no psychiatrists in the community. We had a handful of behavioral health providers. And the fact is that nearly everyone asked for cash pay and didn't accept insurance. The vast majority of individuals that were seeking behavioral health care were making the I-70 trek down to Denver or Grand Junction on a regular basis. And the most common question I was asked was, how severe does my child's behavioral health need to be before I seek a therapist? And what you heard today from Dr. Landau is behavioral health services works the best when it works within a system and when it's prevention. And so everyone in our community seeking care at that time was likely responding to a crisis. And so I'm so incredibly grateful for the individuals that are here on the stage with me, because Vail Health Behavioral Health works within the community. We're part of a continuum of care, and we identify that one part of the spectrum does not work unless we have all ends of the spectrum. So you guys have heard about our mission and our vision. Essentially, we want to have a day where people spend as much time, energy, and resources focusing on their behavioral health as they do their physical health. I want to work with individuals that talk about their therapist in the same way they do about talking about going to PT. And I want employers to support individuals in the same way about going to PT that they do for therapy. We have a number of different service lines, and as Dr. Eck mentioned, one that I'm the most excited about is the Pre-Court Healing Center. And if you've been on I-70 recently, and all of you have been on I-70 recently, and probably a lot of time because it's been snowing, it's the construction that's taking place in Edwards. And that'll be an inpatient psychiatric hospital. It'll be 28 beds, 14 beds adolescent, 14 beds adult. We will be one of the only psychiatric hospitals that'll have individual rooms, because when people are at their most vulnerable, it's a very hard time to also have a roommate. And so we're so excited about this facility. Our clinical services include outpatient behavioral health services, individual, couples, family therapy. We have psychological assessment, neuropsychological assessment, learning disabilities, ADHD evaluations across the board. When I was first hired at Vail Health, we met with a team down in Denver, and they said, you just really need a unicorn because it's going to be so hard to even hire one psychiatrist. And I'm so excited to say that we have 6 psychiatrists, 3 of which are adolescent and child, and the other 3 are adult. We have substance use specific and addiction psychiatrists on our team, and other individuals as well, and clinical case management services. Our services span the entire community, but as we know, the barriers of services are real in rural Colorado, so every single one of our services are available via telehealth. And the fact is that when we're thinking about back in 2006, when I joined this community, how people were waiting for a time of crisis to seek behavioral health care, that means that they were just dealing with that one individual. And we're hoping, because we're reducing barriers, we make it easy for that entire family system to seek care. More information at vhbh.org. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Thank you all so much. There we go. All right, we're going to open it up for Q&A, both here and online. We're going to pass this so you all have a mic too to pass between you all. And we're going to start, I believe, from our online audience.
We're going to start with an online question. For early childhood training, do you have a formal program for grandparents?
Early childhood partners.
Yeah, Julia, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah. Well, I've had so many grandparents come to my parenting classes, but no, nothing formal. But there are many involved, and so we always welcome grandparents. That is for sure. They're very involved.
Awesome. Who's got a question here? Awesome. Speak right into the microphone, and here you go.
Thank you. This is really heartening and beautiful to hear. I love that the chart, Dr. Landau, that you had that showed the connections between the family, and then how sparse those connections could be, and the goal of intensifying those connections. And it just reminded me of what we had heard of kind of the breakdown of cultural systems, the move from cross-sections, families that had multiple generations involved in the care. You were in your local community, and then we transitioned out to a more, kind of suburban nuclear family structure. People are much more mobile, people are moving, and now in the last several generations, the pace has just accelerated and accelerated. So it's almost like that framework of the fraying edges in those connections have made this all much more difficult. So what all of you are trying to do is create new connections, new community systems, new models that are going to be able to replace all that and provide that stability and that resilience across an entire community. So every place in the country needs this kind of a structure, and it's evolving, and it takes the energy of all of you to make that happen. It also reminds, and the question is, the world is getting faster, the world is getting more intense, the challenges are there. So how do you foresee this evolving as we go forward into that environment?
Yeah, I think this is what I said right at the beginning, that I'm enormously proud of what's happening in this valley. It's really a model. One of the joys of having a community this size is that all of these amazing people and services, and there are more, are developing a way of serving a community that is a model for everybody else. And when I first got here, and as you were saying, Casey, there was very, very little. And to see what is happening and what is potential is phenomenal. And what I'm really glad about is that they're documenting. They're going to be able to publish and show how this model really works. And it's a fully systemic model that's considering all of the biological, psychological, social, community, cultural, and spiritual services, and how integrating them in the way that is happening can really substitute for the kinds of community we had in the olden days where support was there at a moment's notice. And it's the most exciting development that I've seen in a long time.
I think on our framing call, you were sharing as well with the models you've implemented, some of the success rate and the size you've been able to do this family-based therapy. Would you
Right.
share?
Yes, for example, in Argentina, after the disaster, the political and economic disaster, by mobilizing the families in the community, we were able to get a 400% increase in young people being brought for treatment within 2 years. And that was a study that was done across 12 million people. Similarly, doing this kind of work, in Kosovo after the war, there was a 90% unemployment rate in the men, over 90% addiction rate, and mental health schizophrenia was extremely relapse and first episodes of schizophrenia, depression had gone up by 60%. And by decentralizing services, which is what's happening here, providing frontline services right in the communities, within 2 years, we were able to have a 98% compliance rate of people with serious mental illness receiving treatment. And it's exactly what all of these amazing services are providing here. So I'm extremely excited. Similarly, with mobilizing a community around adolescent suicide, there was a rash of suicides in the schools a number of years ago, and providing family and community meetings and really working on resilience across the board, they were able to drop the suicide rate within a year. So I have high hopes for what we're going to be seeing in terms of our statistics.
Hello, thank you so much. I recognize a lot of your faces and I love seeing you here. I work at the Bookworm, for all of you that don't know. I know that trauma gets passed down through families for sure, but I know it also gets passed down through community groups, and not necessarily, it does for sure, but not necessarily in communities where people are located, but communities of either race or ethnicity or sexuality or gender and stuff like that. So can you talk about how that kind of trauma affects people? And as the flip side, also how we can build resilience in those little micro communities. And for our local folks here, how you address those, again, micro communities in the work that you do. Do you center, a certain racial group that people are a part of in the work that you do?
Do you want to go first? No?
Judith, do you want to?
Okay. Yes, so one of the things that we've done is community meetings and trained people in communities as taking natural change agents who can hold meetings. And the way of countering the trauma is by helping the community identify its resources. And we do that through the community meetings where people identify the intergenerational strengths. There was one community I worked in where translated the name of the town was Mary Without a Head. And, the idea, the way I heard the name was from a 6-year-old. And the 6-year-old was just saying it like it was fact. Where do you live? Mary Without a Head. And the story was that this was an area where there had been an enormous amount of drug dealers and murders. And they all called it Mary Without a Head because that's where she'd been killed. And the kids were identifying with this name as, that's their life story. So in the community meetings, when they were asked to tell and to listen to the stories of their grandparents and their survival and their great-grandparents and how they'd made it and how they'd managed to get rid of the drug dealers in the town, they start to build those resilience stories that counter the trauma. So there are two methods. The one is the intergenerational stories of resilience, and the other is setting positive goals and then matching those goals. What happens particularly with children, but we all do it. What would you like to see in the future? Well, I'd like to be happy. So helping them break down those overarching goals into practical tasks. What would being happy look like? What would be different about your day? What would be different about what you do? So really looking at how do we take those overarching goals and break them into workable tasks, and then having little groups working to achieve those tasks. So, for example, there was a group of Kosovar immigrants in New York. I was called into New York to help rebuild community after the day after 9/11. And the people who had been refugees and were again traumatized were one of the major groups that we worked with. And the Kosovars were really badly traumatized because they were recent immigrants. And when they looked at what made them happy and how they would get their kids to be happy in the middle of all of the trauma, they said, we used to sing. And so we literally had them sing. We had them sing and dance and remember what held the family, what held the community together during good times. There was a community from in New York, from North Africa, and they rebuilt their rituals and traditions with the children. So finding those qualities and goals that had set them apart and made them feel connected gives people something to live for. And then the trauma settles into just one of those stories that they've overcome. So looking at what do we need to do to regain those strengths to overcome what we're living through right now. And looking at survivorship. Thanks.
And I think the piece that I would add that is a tag to what Dr. Landau said is there's not a one-size-fits-all approach on how you can support community. And the old medical model of having an office and expecting everyone to feel comfortable coming to that office for care does not work. And so if we want to engage the community, we have to have all these different ways of supporting the community where they go and what that looks like and how that is different. And I think behavioral health has done a tremendous job at looking at that, from peer support specialists to behavioral health providers that are based in the community, behavioral health providers that are based within a school setting, and trying to target that stigma and reduce barriers and then promote the healing within.
Right.
Hi, I'm Kat Haber. I'm your local TEDx Fail organizer. And if you would like to hear directly from youth speak about their mental health challenges, they'll be speaking April 14th at Battle Mountain High School. Great. Judith, thank you so much for all of the good that you have done over the past dozen years since your own TEDx Fail talk in 2012. And my question is this: for those of you who work with teens, what do you see as the ultimate vision for support for them among their own community? Could you imagine them being sufficiently educated in emotional intelligence skills to be able to intervene when they hear a friend might be cutting themselves, or on our own team for TEDx Fail, we've had a team member commit suicide the year after they were working on our project. We've had the best friend of our organizer. He was completely unaware that he also committed suicide. So it's touching us very closely, and it hurts my heart to think that we adults could have done something, but it hurts even more deeply that the kids themselves don't know what to do. And I'd like to see if we could intervene at a closer, faster pace.
Give it to Marcus.
Alrighty then. I think going off of myself, and I think the youth that we have in our valley, being able to create and maintain more spaces where they get to talk about this, right? Where, like at Valley's Voice with Mountain Youth, where we bring youth together. It's a safe space where they get to decide what they want to do event-wise, right? They get to talk about what issues they're struggling with, what, if anything, a specific issue, a passion project that they want to implement in their community, and then we bring them and connect them to experts that can make that happen. I think we're doing such a great job. We're all here talking about this. We're normalizing mental health. We're normalizing talking about it. We're normalizing not suffering in silence, which is such a huge thing, right? I remember as a young youth being gay and being biracial in a predominantly white high school, talking about mental health, talking about sexuality, that was not a thing that was present. And being in these schools now in our valley, seeing these conversations happen not just in a negative way about the negative things, but also talking about the positives, the strengths in our micro communities, right? That differences make us stronger in our communities, not that it's just the similarities that we have to focus on, but the differences unite us, right? They make us stronger and enmesh us together. So, continuing to us as adults with our youth talking about these things and normalizing it. They see their parents or their caregivers talking about their mental health, talking about going to a therapist, talking about how they struggled as a teenager. Those things help our youth as well feel like they can talk about it also with their friends.
Right.
So I don't work with teenagers. I work with littles, and I think that that's kind of where we are, where we're heading, is starting as early as early childhood partners, but also in the schools we're talking about it as early as kindergarten and giving them language. And I know specifically at my school, we've developed Hope Squad so that children who are older can help support other children, and they're learning how to find signs, and they're learning how to be confidants for their peers. And that starts at 5th grade. So giving children that autonomy and those lessons to learn to help support each other, going all the way up through elementary, middle, and high school. And then, as well as like most of the Hope Center clinicians, we're also trying to teach families how to have those conversations and how to recognize, or how to be how to respond in, non-judgmental ways, and have those honest conversations with their child about something that's really, really scary for everybody to hear.
Great.
Hi, I'm Aiden. I was wondering, since you see trauma being passed down through generations, do you see substance abuse following that?
Okay, so yes, trauma is the trauma. When we see trauma in a family, we see not just substance use disorder, but we also see behavioral health and mental health issues and physical health issues. And what's really interesting is that There is a genetic component, but that obviously genes do have some influence. But just because there is trauma and there may be addiction in a family doesn't mean that it has to continue in that family. That with all chronic relapsing illnesses, including high blood pressure, diabetes, asthma, substance use disorder, schizophrenia, depression, the trauma alone is not going to produce the problem. And if we have genetics and trauma at the same time, there's more vulnerability to a relapse or to using or whatever it is. But that can be prevented by working with the strengths and the resources. So just because a family has generations of trauma and addiction or mental health challenges, it can stop with intervention and healing. So working with the family can prevent the addiction continuing across the generations. The TED Talk that Kat mentioned would be a good one for you to watch. It's called Family Stories, Secrets, and Survival. So it can be stopped in any generation by looking at the strengths and rebuilding those connections. Okay? It's a good question, thank you.
We will send a link to that TED Talk out to all of our registrants, and your parents can get it to you, I assure you.
He's watched it, that one's mine.
I just love this discussion. It's amazing when you talk to clients about resilience, and this was just a discussion last week with one of my clients where she's just talking about so many hardships, and focusing on all the trauma. And when I pointed out, wow, in these extreme situations, even though on paper, and maybe even a police report, they didn't look good, but you could see this unbelievable resilience shining through the storyline. Right. And she just paused and she said, wow, no one's ever highlighted that for me. And so you kind of just see this moment with a client where they just light up.
Yeah.
And so I love talking about resilience with clients, because I think it's oftentimes overlooked. And then the other thing we're talking about, like trauma that's carried down through generations. Sometimes I feel like when a client shows up, they're the one that says, this anxiety, this thing that I'm carrying, and it could be something that they have just carried down the pain from other generations, their grandfather's pain. And oftentimes when I see a client, it's like, it comes out as anxiety and it's very displaced. So they don't even know where it's coming from, but they know they're having the symptoms. And so what I'm so amazed at is when someone shows up, I know they're the one in that generational line that says, this is not okay.
This is where it stops.
This is where it stops. Yeah. And they're changing it. They're working with the pain of the past generations and their future generations. Right. So I'm always honored and amazed by clients.
Great. Thank you.
As a former attorney, I actually think our courts contribute. I think they do a disservice to our communities. I think they create a lot of mental health issues within families. And I was just wondering if the Eagle County is working with the courts and getting mental health into whether criminal or civil cases.
Yeah, I can take that. At Vail Health Behavioral Health, we work very, very closely with our court system as well as our probation department. I think one of the really nice things, especially across the 5th Judicial District, is our problem-solving courts that really are trying to take that lens of recovery and resiliency, and rather than a punitive approach of having healing and positive change. And for those that aren't familiar, looking into recovery courts, and oftentimes they center around substance use, but what it often focuses on is the fact that an individual, in order to be in the situation they're in, you have to take in all the circumstances, including the behavioral health services. And if we can get them the right services, maybe they wouldn't be in the circumstances and make those choices. And I think that's so incredible. And, I think that where we hope to grow as a community engaged in behavioral health is there's still so much work to do in the substance use realm. We have some services available, but given our community and the community need, we still need to tremendously grow those.
Yeah, one of the things that Massachusetts did when we worked with the legal system there was they brought families in before sentencing and the families and the offenders made a decision together about whether they wanted to be sentenced or go to treatment. And their rate of recovery has improved exponentially since that changed.
And I would just add on behalf of your Hope Center. Sure. Just on behalf of your Hope Center, Dr. Teresa Haynes is our clinical director, and she serves on a pretrial services committee with judges and law enforcement. So just like what you're saying, and Casey said, but your Hope Center is represented in advocating for those community members to get mental health support when needed.
Great.
Okay, we had another question online. I wonder if you could speak to what we know about the generational change in mental and behavioral health. And the question was kind of teasing at, it feels like there's a lot more dialogue, a lot more attention, a lot more identification of these things now. Is that because there's more of it, or because we're better at knowing about it and talking about it? How has that changed over generations?
Well, I was going to just set you up to ask about the chicken or the egg, Dr. Landau.
I think it's both. I think we are living much more accelerated lives, and that makes a big difference. We're also, if we look at the changes in the life spiral, our development has changed. And I think we're also learning about transparency. I think about when I was president of the New York State American Cancer Society for a while. And during that period, which we're going back now into the 80s, cancer was still whispered about. I'm a cancer survivor. I am proud of being a cancer survivor. I've also been in recovery for 61 years. So I introduce myself not as an addict, but being grateful to be in long-term recovery, because I have learned about pride with cancer, and we no longer, the American Cancer Society's done a phenomenal job of people talking about cancer. I mean, I remember my mother would whisper when somebody had cancer. And I think it was because cancer was a death sentence. We now look at cancer as most cancers can be treated. They may be long-term treatment. Some of them are still lethal. But we don't whisper it anymore, but we still whisper about substance use disorder, we whisper about drugs, we whisper about somebody being transsexual. There are things that we still treat as though they should be stigmatized. And the biggest change that we can bring about in our generations is transparency. because with transparency comes healing. Without it, we continue the stigmatizing and having people feel ashamed of who they are. And we have to remove the shame, blame, and guilt for people to heal.
Just might add something quick. There's that saying, what we resist persists, right? And I think we see that so much now is awareness. If you don't know you have a problem, you can't fix it. And so in our awareness, we're talking about it more. That's when we can say, oh wait, that is a problem, or oh wait, that's something that's not that's unhealthy. That's something that isn't normal in a relationship. I think of with myself, my mom saw physical abuse on her side of the family. My dad had physical abuse on his side of the family. They got together, and guess what? Yeah. There was physical abuse in that relationship, right? Talking about that abuse is still very secretive on both sides of my family. Not being able to accept and talk about it. There's so much resistance there. And that has persisted. Finally, my mom left my dad, and there was a lot of her owning that and talking to myself and my sisters about abuse, right? That persistence, that resistance wasn't there as much, so we could learn, oh, that's not healthy. Right. So we don't make those mistakes in our relationships.
Yeah. Great.
Any other questions in the audience? We have one in the back. Here I come.
So I have a question, because I know, and we were discussing with my partner here next to me, trauma has always existed in the past. You know, we come from families with trauma. However, I feel that the older people, we're still a generation that have more resilience and coping and, emotional skills stronger than nowadays. What do you think has weakened our youth generations nowadays, that everything is affecting them, that they don't find any inspiration, that they don't have any passion, that they are not getting open? I mean, we just talk about there are so many resources out there and transparency in teens, and however our kids are closing up, they don't want to talk. Where are we lacking? I mean, because I think if trauma can be transferred, also the strong skills. Nowadays, kids don't want to work. They're not a weak generation, because I don't think they are. Because they challenge parents too much, and they don't have that discipline. Is it a lack of discipline that we are having, that pretty much parents are being held hostage sometimes for the young kids to do everything they want and have easy access to things? What is like making our generation more demanding, less responding, less resistant? Or what is exactly that we as an adults are lacking right now to help those young kids? Because we know resources out there, but if they don't want to talk, we cannot force them. How can we make those kids have passion? How can we make those kids find goals? Even if we try to break it up, it's been hard. Yeah. And I know that's the air that we're breathing right now at schools. So how can we help those young people? I mean, you work in the schools. I know that you have a lot of stories. So give us an example of what is breaking these kids so much here and in the hearts, that are, taking actions that we can prevent if we as an adults know how, but we have to get the help. Right. And also as a parents, if we ask clinicians like you, we don't get response. I mean, sometimes we just hear that, oh, your kid is gonna be fine now, but how fine? How do you stabilize my kid that in a way that I cannot do it? So how can we learn those skills, or how can we also as a parents and adults can have access to those skills, or maybe stabilizations that you did with our kids, so we can continue at home and help them, like a prescription per se, So I don't know, I mean, if that makes sense.
So thinking about it from the early childhood perspective, and I'm sure Dr. Landau has a lot to add, and everybody, but I think partly some of this screen time and not blaming that's not all to blame, but that takes parents away, and we lead an incredible incredible group for childcare providers and parents called Circle of Security, and it talks about being gone. And parents are gone a lot, and it's not because they just go to work. They have to go to work, but they're gone because they're on their own screen, or they're not just relating to their children. And I think a child learns to have passion when a parent shows them how much they matter to them by showing so much attention. And children want a connection with their caregivers. Sometimes it's not the nuclear family. That's very common, of course. But in the primary caregivers, children want a connection with their parents. And if they don't get a connection, they're going to get it through attention. And a lot of times it's negative attention. Because they're not getting that connection through somebody just spending time following their lead, playing with them, engaging with things that they love to do, following a child's lead and following a child's need. We often talk about lead, but we should be talking also about following a child's need. Children don't know. They don't talk about a developed brain. Their brains are so far from developed. We have the developed brain. And so to me, and Dr. Landau, I'll pass it to you, but I feel like the most important thing a parent can do is starting from birth, and maybe even when they're in utero, is just spending time with them. And sometimes parents need to use the screen to get dinner done or to do the tasks that are so challenging, and they need to do that. And we can't just take away screens completely. But we also need to be like, you have this child, and this child deserves your connection with them. They can't do it without you. They can only do it with you. So, hold on.
Yeah, I think we're seeing, thanks, thanks so much. And I think this is the early childhood group is such an amazing resource. But I just want to emphasize what you've said. And we have to accept the reality, and it got a lot worse during COVID when we had parents working, and I think it's not just the screen. A lot of kids have learned to self-soothe by playing on their own, by reading, by screens, whatever it is. And they've become less socialized. And the less social they are and the less they have time with other children and with parents, the more they're going to misbehave and be rude and challenging. And it is so much the question of, and not just time, but quality time. It's not just be in the kitchen while mom's cooking. It's actually that 5 minutes of personal attention is more important than the hour of watching TV together. So I think using the resources that are here with the Early Childhood Center can make an enormous difference. Discussion with other parents, grandparents getting together. We have, and I really love that we can do groups on Zoom, because it allows grandparents who are immobile to spend time not just with the experts, but also with grandchildren. So I hope that's helpful, but you're right, we are at a very challenging time right now. And if we don't change our interaction with the little ones, we're going to see waves of substance use disorder, depression, and suicide. So thank you for that question. It's really critical.
And our experts will be here too for individual questions, hanging out here for a little bit as we go.
As we close.
Well, I can talk to you afterward.
Yes.
All right, we have a lot of gratitude to share for this program, but let's start with our local providers and Dr. Judith Landau.
Thank you.